Greetings and bienvenue, MITZU. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Some viewers may find the following video disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
I had moved out of my parents' home a few months before, and I had moved into a rented room a few miles north of the folks' place. The house next door was a weird 50s Art Deco house that had been cut up and divided into a rooming house. The front room, which had been the living room, had an older woman move in. She was reasonably attractive. She became friendly with my housemate, a druggie who lived on disability. A few days before this strange night, I had a long, involved dream, but I knew somehow this dream was not my own. It was as if something had happened and this dream had been implanted in place of the memory. The next night it happened again, except in this dream I had been in some large concourse, like an airport or a convention center, and I decided to roll around on the carpet. As I did so, the carpet became my bed and I was rolling out of it onto the floor. I clearly saw my bedroom illuminated by the light of my computer display. When I rolled out of bed, I began to fall when suddenly two unseen hands grabbed me on each flank. They felt large and very strong. I then felt myself going up rapidly. I heard myself yell as I went through the ceiling and was staring at the ceiling joists and the scant amount of blown insulation in the attic. I could see the joists a little bit, as though something was illuminating the floor of the attic where I was, and getting dimmer as I looked along. I then was laying in my bed on my back as though nothing had happened. The next day I had to go look in the attic, and it looked exactly as I had seen in the event the previous night. As time went on, one day the woman agreed to go out for drinks one evening. After my work, she had been employed at one time but was now unemployed. We both got cleaned up and went out. We went to one bar, then another. Throughout the evening she continually pressed her chest into my back to adjust them in some shirt where the shirt doubled as the bra. She flashed me at one point, so you can imagine where my mind was wandering. She got drunker as the night wore on, but I stopped drinking early to remain sober to drive her home. Sometime after 1:30 a.m., we had begun to talk about the paranormal, and I told her about my experiences in my parents' home. I mentioned the odd dream event from the previous night, and suddenly she exclaimed,
"That was me who carried you."
She went on to explain that she was a medium and various spirits and angels could communicate through her. She began to disclose that she was an energy healer and tried to touch me to prove it to me. At first I felt nothing, but when she touched me on the face with the fingertips of both hands, I could feel, I guess, energy that had a feeling of a painless electric shock combined with a feeling. As the bar staff began to close down and push everyone to pay their tabs, I told her the story of my 2006 encounter, and her face suddenly became very distressed. As we left the bar, I began to ask about numerology and astrology and tarot cards, as I had become interested in such things in the few years preceding, and I was told there was something to it, but it wasn't what I thought it was. We continued conversing until we parked in my driveway. Here is where she began to tell me about a way to get negative spirits or energy out of the body, where one takes a deep breath, clenches all of the muscles of the upper body, and then releases it all with a great exhale. I did this a few times on her instruction until I did it, and then I felt something odd, like a rush of the same shock feeling as before, except it was over my entire body. I had goosebumps from head to toe. I hadn't noticed, but her voice had changed its tone slightly. About this time she turned to me and said,
"Do you know who I am, B? I am the Lord your God."
And she made statements that if I didn't either get my life right or follow instructions, I would receive at a later time.
"I will bury you. I will destroy you."
Once the statement was finished, just like out of the movies, she slowly began to lose consciousness and lean forward until after about a second of unconsciousness she sprung back up as a giggling drunk chick. We then made our way to the porch on the front of the house, which contained a door into the common part of the house and what used to be the front door but was now the door to her room. We sat at a plastic table and chairs, and she began to tell me about being some kind of angel in the flesh. They mentioned that as long as she kept up with her assignments, she was allowed to drink alcohol, smoke cigarettes, and do something else without physical consequences. As we would speak, a spirit or spirits would suddenly take her over. It disliked cigarettes, throwing one she was smoking away at one point and at another ordering,
"Extinguish all cigarettes at once."
Sometimes the voice would be gentle and caring, other times it would be angry and would constantly threaten me with elimination. In her human state, we'll call her C. C explained to me it meant my physical body, and everything touching it would be sent straight to hell with no body, clothing, or evidence left behind. At one point I was reminded of how the previous year had sucked. The spirit used that word and was told the next year would be great. The first half was actually worse than the year before, but things did indeed fall into place in the second half. As this evening and series of events progressed, it began to get cold. This was a night in early November 2008. But despite that being in Florida, it still had been in the mid-60s and calm. It lacked any real need for a coat or jacket unless you were easily chilled. But the air around us was getting cold, and despite my asking C if it was getting cold, she seemed oblivious to it, telling me it was in the 60s. I began to see our breaths condensing in the air and began to shiver. She had a pet common marmoset, and about this time I began to hear it get agitated in her room. Through the door I began to hear the monkey making the noises it would make when fighting something, and I heard this clear verbalization that sounded like a bibbity bobbity bobbity bop boppity 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 bop, and I heard nails scraping near the bottom of the door. C was then taken over by a spirit once more and said, "The animal is doing battle," calling the monkey a little portal. It was apparently engaged in battle with the red demon and told me to pray while it went inside to take care of the issue. Having abandoned a Methodist upbringing for atheism and then something akin to the Baha'i faith, I began to attempt conventional prayer. I was already pretty scared, but when I began to hear loud, high-pitched non-human screams of agony from inside the door, I was terrified. At some point during the screaming, I heard footsteps approaching from behind me in a sprint, making me jump about a foot in the air as I looked to find there was nothing there. I could hear things, but I didn't see anything. After that, C came back outside and the spirit inside of her yelled at me to stop trembling as I shook violently from a mix of fear and chill. The temperature returned to normal. Each time the spirit would put her back, it was always the same, a slow loss of consciousness, and then she was back. In her human consciousness, C asked things like, "Did he make you levitate?" She had no recollection of anything the spirit or spirits would say. She wouldn't often even know that she had been gone. At another point of this night, while C was under a spirit's control, my druggy housemate came outside to get something from his car, and the spirit said,
He must not know that of which we speak, or I shall have to eliminate him.
Then began talking about fun at the bar in an exaggerated, goofy girl voice. At yet another point, as C spoke, she emitted or I heard a high-pitched sound that sounded similar to a whistle, yet much softer and a bit more pleasant. C immediately covered her mouth and said that was her angel voice. At some point, the spirit stopped taking her over, and eventually I went back home. Later the next day, she happened to be outside as I was about to leave to go somewhere, and C and another girl who lived at the house, Jay, were sitting outside. Jay had the supposed ability to use telepathy and the ability to see entities. She described a shadow man that I could not see that was following me around everywhere. C offered to take me to a mystic supply store to get things to do a cleansing of my room. On the way there, I began to feel what I can best describe as a cold sadness that was oppressing me. Once we got to this store, inside I began to feel the same energy feeling, but C began to feel ill. She claimed the thing following me was attacking her now. She got some woman to pick out about 9 or 12 healing, precious stones for me to carry around, and we got a scented candle, patchouli oil, and a few things for the bedroom cleansing. Once we left, C began to feel better, and I began to feel the same cold sadness again. C continually chided me in and out of the store because she could tell by my thoughts that I didn't have the same faith in that store and its wares as she did. When I complained about feeling oppressed again, she asked where my stones were, got them from the bag from the store, and threw them in my lap. The instant they touched me, we both saw a dark shadow fly out from behind us and out the window on her side. I felt the same energy feeling. She had to spit mucus the entire ride home from whatever illness had been plaguing her during her attack. That evening, we did the cleansing of my bedroom. I can't remember everything required for it, but I had to hold a raw egg in my hands, and she kept repeating,
Leave peacefully or leave painfully.
As she did this ritual, I heard, clear as day, this inhuman, labored breathing coming from my right, but again I could see nothing. No shadow, no nothing. C claimed several things flew out of my open window. I spent a good deal of time with C following this, and like any good drug addict, she began to use me for her own gain. I was under the influence that God and the angels worked through her, and if she got pissed, she got pissed. You didn't want to make her unhappy. It was probably why she had been divorced 3 times at 37 and why her ex-boyfriend had kicked her out. She could be the infamous contentious woman. She had been in a car wreck approximately 10 years prior, where she had been in a head-on collision and the right side of her face had been destroyed in the accident. She had been rebuilt pretty well, but after the head trauma is when she began to get psychic ability, and then the spirits and visits to another dimension began. Spirits continued to just randomly put words in her mouth, including my 1989 Ford Taurus. My van didn't seem to have a presence, but my Taurus didn't like her. Whenever she would get into it as a passenger, it often would just not run well. When it ran great for me. She even commented that the car didn't like her, at which point she turned to me and said,
Sure don't. This woman is bad news. Get her out of me and out of your life before she ruins us both.
C claimed that was my car speaking through her. She didn't lose consciousness, it was just a sudden statement that wasn't her own. This happened reasonably frequently. The scariest incident was when we were having a conversation and I said the word soon. She immediately said in a spooky, evil voice,
Soon and very soon I shall be biting off your earlobes. Yes, I shall.
What is odd is for a brief time things began to put words in my mouth. On one occasion I was preparing to go to Home Depot with someone and he said he had to find his water bottle. I immediately pipe up, Is it not behind the white pot? I had no way to know it was there. On another occasion, I was at work leaving a voicemail to a customer, and in the middle of that, I heard C's voice loudly in my head telling me to do something. Your thoughts were not your own necessarily in her company. She began to exercise her influence over me to get things she wanted. C, as it turned out, was wanted for something she claimed she didn't do, but I later learned it was check fraud. She forged a final paycheck and took it to Amscot rather than a crappy gas station that would have just cashed it without a second thought. She also had a suspended license and bullied me into borrowing my vehicles. On another occasion, Jay became pregnant from her live-in boyfriend. They both worked as unlicensed massage therapists who served male clients, sometimes not requiring their massage table. They weren't into drugs that I knew, just stupid. I had to share a bathroom with them for 2 weeks, be glad you didn't. C claimed she was going to cast a spell to make Jay lose the child. One evening when Jay, C and I were sitting outside having margaritas that consisted of salted fruit in a glass with rum poured over it due to the blender being broken, Jay began to get a dark stain in the crotch of her pants. That means she was drinking while pregnant. Brilliant, and C said privately to me that that meant her spell had worked. Jay had a positive pregnancy test, but the same day C claimed she cast a death spell on the fetus, Jay bled profusely and was no longer pregnant. She had to make restitution payments and bullied me into giving her money. I liquidated much of my era to give to her. It wasn't giant, but it was acceptable for 23. I was having issues with my current landlady, and as she was looking for a place to stay, she got Jay and I to agree to be roommates. Jay flaked out quickly, but I had to stay. C needed someone with good credit to be on the lease. Long story short, I had to pay most of the security and the first and last month's rent. Then the night before I was to move in, I was told I couldn't move in, and I spent a couple weeks in a crappy room in her old house with no heat during the coldest 2 weeks of the year before I moved in with her. She moved in with her daughter's ex because he had just been released from youth prison after being there from ages 14 to 21 for being part of a violent home invasion where he disabled 2 people. He tried to rehabilitate himself, but with only C for a support network, he didn't stand a chance. C frequently bought things and then returned them, or pulled the return receipt scam. She bragged to daughter's ex about the show she was going to put on when she went to return some nylon cat house thing that her monkey didn't like. After a couple of weeks, C kicked out daughter's ex and began to try to get me to move in finally. She continued to use drugs, behave erratically, and generally manipulate people. Once I moved in, she began to get sick. She got severe edema in her legs. After a week, she went into the hospital for 6 days. In the middle of the night, she called me and asked me to bring a backpack she had packed and had forgotten in her haste to be transported to the hospital. On the drive, a religious radio station faded in and I heard the tail end of a sermon on false prophets. The guy might as well have been talking about C. My mother told me this was my opportunity to pack all of my things and run away. For the week I stayed and fed her monkey, the cable had been in daughter's ex's name and it was shut off for non-payment shortly after I got there. When she got out of the hospital, the next day she began texting me that she had put the cable in my name and I had better have the money for the deposit or else. I did a side job, then hung out at the bar. Once I got home, she was in her bedroom with her daughter and I ran upstairs to my bedroom, where I hid out for the evening. C asked me about the deposit, but told me to enjoy my nap. C's daughter asked for money to buy cigarettes and I slipped it under the door. I heard C singing a happy operetta.
I hate my daughter's boyfriend so much. I shall cast a spell on.
Oh, my back hurts.
See, that's what you get for casting spells on people.
This continued for a long time, 10 or 20 minutes. She had spoken about casting death spells and bad luck spells on people. The next day I left for work, took the cable money and put a deposit on another place. The rest is history. I changed my number. I felt bad for leaving, but she had been asking for my banking information. She already had my social status from the lease application, but she wanted my banking information. When I thought no, she responded with,
That's the most evil thought I've ever heard you think.
I never did give it to her. She was still friends with daughter's ex, who was now on the run from the law in South Florida for a violent strong-arm robbery. She was even trying to make me believe, to brainwash me into thinking my mother deliberately caused a kitchen accident that scared my thigh and upper arm at age 3. The scary thing was I was beginning to believe it. I've read about the incident from both my mother's and father's point of view and it was a genuine accident. I believe she would have taken all of my assets, and then I would have been murdered or eliminated.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.